Do you want to hear a fun story what happened to me at the shops?
Tell me a fun story at the shops.
So I went to the shops to get my dad a Father's Day card.
That was the start of a rap. So I went to the shops.
So I went down to the shop to get a Father's Day card for my father.
Tends to be why I get them.
There were no actual... That's the standard. I couldn't find any proper Father's Day cards, so I grabbed him one that had a llama on it. I thought that'll do. So then when I was at the till checking out the stuff, I said to him, have you got any more relevant Father's Day cards? And he went, oh, there's some over there. So I checked, and there was one for Grandad, and I was like, I don't think he'll appreciate if I buy him one for Grandad's. So I was like, oh, don't worry about it, mate. And he goes, oh, so it's not for you then? Looking at my Father's Day card, he goes, so it's not for you then? So in that moment, this random co-op employee has made several assumptions about me. One, that I look old and weary enough to be a father. And two, if I wasn't old and weary enough to be a father, I'd be the kind of father who has to buy himself Father's Day cards. So...
It's funny, but also, it's funny because it's kind of... What else do you do apart from laugh? Because there's a lot of sadness tinged in that, isn't there?
But yes, that's the story of how I got completely owned by a random co-op employee today. And speaking of bad fatherhood imagery, I guess, today's episode is about Artemis Fowl.
Yeah, it's not the worst link we've done, is it?
It's better than the Christopher Nolan Wonderwall cover that I edited out of the last episode.
Oh, dear. We live and learn.
Welcome to Movies and Martin's sometimes weekly film podcast, hosted by two boys called Martin. Yes, that is the gimmick and the only unique selling point we both have. We both spent several years of our lives doing critical theory degrees, and now, worried they're going to waste, we're whiling away our time during quarantine, picking apart movies, and the end. That's the end of the introduction.
That's a much better second try, isn't it?
It's not bad, yeah. I'd say third time's a charm, but I don't think I have it in me.
That's a little peek behind the curtain of how well this recording went.
I like how you say peek behind the curtain, like that's going to make it into the edit. That's really... I'm going to build up all the times you reference the fact I've edited stuff out, and I'm going to have them at the end of the episodes and build up a larger cinematic universe. Be like cameos from the shit bits of the episode.
It's our special features.
Yeah. I am joined, as always, by the inimitable, the personable, the only reason to drive up to Durham County to get an eye test, Mr. Martin Shaw. I'd like to point of order, he winked at the camera when I said that, but you don't know that because it's a podcast.
And sitting across from me, virtually of course, is the inquisitive, interpretive, mouth from the south, Martin Docherty.
Interpretive! That's a fun one.
I picked the longest ones I could find.
Smart and Googled I words. Right. So today's episode, following a new format we're going to call Disasterpiece. So we're primarily interested in this series in looking at why bad films don't work and how they could have worked and what that can tell us about films in a larger scale and maybe how good films work. We've already spent one of these episodes doing a deep dive into a film we think is brilliant, which is Christopher Nolan's The Prestige. And now we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2020 outing, Artemis Fowl. The phrase Disasterpiece, which is the new format we're pursuing here, is one borrowed from Martin Shaw's review that came out recently on his blog cinematography.wordpress.com. And to sort of kick off the episode, Martin's going to read you his first paragraph to sort of contextualise our kind of initial thoughts on the film before we dive a bit deeper. So Martin, please take it away.
Lovely. Artemis Fowl is a beloved children's book series by Irish author Owen Colfer. They weren't massively my cup of tea when I was a kid, but I definitely remember it trying to the first couple out at least. At the height of its popularity, the book series was optioned for the silver screen all the way back in 2001 by Miramax. It sort of languished for years in development hell whilst the number of books grew and grew, until the House of Mouse itself purchased the rights in sometime around 2013. They picked up Kenneth Branagh as a director 5 years ago, dropped a trailer about midway through 2018, and finally, nearly 20 years later, viewers can lay eyes on the Artemis Fowl movie as a Disney Plus exclusive. But should they?
Short answer, no.
No.
If you have Disney Plus already, don't watch it. Yeah, so Martin's interested that he wasn't hugely into the books as a kid. I absolutely devoured this book series by Owen Colfer when I was younger. I absolutely adored it. I sort of, when I was looking up Owen Colfer's research for this episode, I realised I was actually sort of like, when I was in my young years, I was quite the stan of Owen Colfer. Like, I read more of his books than I think maybe any other author at the time.
I was a Percy Jackson kid.
You're Percy Jackson. Well, yeah, I also devoured Percy Jackson, but for me, it wasn't just the Artemis Fowl books. It was, he wrote a lot of stuff that I really, really, really loved.
Oh, fair.
Similar, I guess, Derek Landy was another one who wrote the Scott the Green Peasant series that I really loved. For Owen Colfer, it might have just been in terms of, like, maybe my mum saw that it was the same bloke who wrote Artemis Fowl and then bought me books on that. But whatever it was, I read so many of his books when I was younger. Obviously, there's 9 Artemis Fowl books. I think I read up to number 7, I think, because after that I sort of was growing out of the age where it sort of started to be...
I'm pretty sure I remember reading 3 of them, the first 3.
Yeah, and so this film is kind of an amalgam... Well, it sells as an amalgam of the first 2 books, Artemis Fowl and Artemis Fowl Art Incident. I'm going to talk a bit more about that at length, because I know the extent to which they borrow from the second book, and it's very minimal. But we'll talk about that later on in the episode. So he wrote 7 Artemis Fowl books. I
thought it was 9.
7 Artemis Fowl books that I read. 9 in total.
Yeah.
My favourite of his books, Half Moon Investigations was good, as I said, but my favourite of his books was one called The Supernaturalist, which was an utterly brilliant, beautiful book about a boy who it's set in sort of the near future in a place called Satellite City, and it's the star is a boy who lives in a home for parentally challenged children, which I thought was an exceptionally funny joke at the time. And it was about like weird little kind of blue kind of ghost creatures that emerged when people died under certain conditions, and about people who had near-death experiences were able to see them on some occasions. It was absolutely fantastically written book, The Supernaturalist. But I got into Colfer firstly from his Artemis Fowl outings, which came out in 2001. I got into them when I was a bit old, a bit later on in 2001, because I was 4 at the time, so I wouldn't have been reading Artemis Fowl then.
I think it sort of across the board, it's safe to say that they're easily his most visibly successful series.
Oh, they are an absolute institution of Irish children's literature and just general children's literature.
Yeah. Which is what makes it all the more painful that it has been turned into this.
Colfer's now joining a cadre of children's authors who have had horrendously adapted works, and this one was taken up by Kenneth Branagh under the helm. Kenneth Branagh took the helm of this under Disney. And it's a difficult watch, to say the least. It's confused and...
A very diplomatic description.
Challenging thematically, filmically, and logically, is what I would call it. Last time we did an episode on a full film, we entered a spoiler zone partly the way through. This whole thing is going to spoil... We're in the spoiler zone now. You're already here in the spoiler zone with me, Martin Shaw. You are already here.
You never
can't
left.
Escape. He never left. Because I don't think this film is worthy of consideration. Its plot is worthy of special consideration that would stop us spoiling it. So we're going to spoil the entire film in this, because you won't watch it and you shouldn't. For anyone who hasn't bothered to watch it, or didn't quite catch everything in the lucid fever dream that it presents itself on the screen as, we'll give you a brief plot summary of the events that happen in the film before moving into our general issues. So, the entire film is framed by the MI6 interrogation of one Mr. Mulch Biggums, a dwarf who's been captured by the Secret Service in order to chase down the Fowl family.
Artemis Fowl II, son of internationally renowned businessman of the same name, is an incredibly gifted young boy, far outperforming his current age group at school.
One day, his father never returns from a business trip, and he receives a call from an ominous person that says he must retrieve mystical fairy artifact, the Aculos, as the ransom or risk his father's death.
And from this point, Fowl uncovers his father's true secrets and finally realises why he was so keen on teaching him Irish folklore.
After discovering his father's criminal exploits, the young boy begins his criminal career, using every resource available to him to track down his father, developing a plan that will allow him to hold all the cars and steal the Aculos from the fairies and the lower elements.
He lures out and imprisons a fairy, Officer Short, forcing the Lep Recon fairy force to show up for an assault on Fowl Manor for a standoff which sees him negotiate with Lep Recon Commander Root.
Every time you say Lep Recon, I lose a year off my life.
It's painful to read.
A rogue general unleashes a troll on the manor, causing him to flee in panic and discover the Aculos is on the grounds of Fowl Manor the whole time with the help of dwarf Mulch Dickens.
Rather than use it for ransom, Artemis instead allows Officer Holly Short to use the Aculos to try and bring her father back, after she uses her powers to save his bodyguard Dom.
After a brief, disheartening moment, Fowl number 1 appears on the grounds and they set off to stop the villainous Opal Cowboy. I'll be honest, it reads a lot better than it presents itself.
It sounds... The way I've summarised it sounds like a fairly sort of simplistic plot, I think, that sort of would be quite good as a sort of simple, light action, sci-fi, sort of fantasy-esque film.
But I think this is us ordering the plot and the kind of chronological events that occur in the film, and sort of we've given a logic to the events that follow on from each other. The problem is the film does not give us those logical connections as clearly as it should do, and the underlying structure is, I think, one of the biggest flaws of this piece. So that's one of the sort of general issues I have, is kind of the kind of structural writing of the film, but also the structural editing is also particularly difficult to get our minds around. So when we talk about there's like moment-to-moment editing, and there's structural editing, which is a distinction that's made in fantastic video by Dan Olson on the editing of Suicide Squad, where he makes a distinction. Structural editing is basically how the film has been edited post hoc in order to restructure it and to put it in a certain order. And that it's probably, I imagine, how this entire film was constructed.
I mean, it has to be, because you can't tell me that they had a film in development for 20 years to only come out with a 95-minute runtime?
93 minute, 15 seconds. I remember that number scarred into my head as I started the watch of it, and I saw that number just appear, and I was like, that's gonna... Because it feels like a really long film. It doesn't go by quickly.
No, it's not a fun or engaging watch, and I think that is the main problem. Is structurally, because both types of editing in this film are really skewed, I think. So the moment-to-moment editing is very confused. Because of that, the structure just doesn't hold weight when you're watching it, which makes it feel just kind of exhausting to watch. Yeah,
and I bet there is an argument for this film based on the idea, it's a children's film, it's just something for kids to enjoy. They'll watch it, they'll like the pretty colours, and it doesn't matter. And to that I say, why should your children only be allowed to watch Drek? Like, this argument is never made about the original Star Wars film, which is, if we're being honest, it's got darker moments in, but it's a kids' film. It's a space opera for kids.
Well, I mean, that argument holds no weight post Inside Out.
I like Rango. Rango's a great film for kids. Where it's the lizard who is like a cowboy. It's great. No,
I remember
brilliant
watching
film.
It was a good film.
And it's well, and like the Lego Movie, that's a movie for kids. It's well structured. It's a film being for kids, I would argue, is not a cogent argument for why it's allowed to be bad.
No,
because you shouldn't just be filling your kids up with Drek. Like, Up is a film for kids, and it's beautiful.
Also, just that argument doesn't hold weight for most of these adapted products because the source material is good. So
Yeah, exactly. And you have to wonder why. It's an argument I see appearing quite a lot, and I don't like this notion that the media that children consume should be of inherently less value and less critical consideration of the media we consume, because the messages, and not just messages, the messages, the ideas about art, the ideas about what's fun to enjoy, what's fun to watch, I think it's very important when you're talking about media that we give to kids and what kids kind of absorb as messages and materials.
The media that you consume, especially in your formative years, has a massive weight on your own personal development. So if you believe that children can't consume things that have significant emotional depth or like complex ideas that they could deal with in a way that is processable by children, then like why would you even bother marketing anything to children? Because anything you make is going to be just the most bland piece of like boring media ever if you can't possibly get around making something interesting and engaging that also happens to be primarily aimed as a family film.
Before we went into our issues, a specific and detailed analysis of some of the issues with the film, I think it's always worth, with things like this, to look for a silver lining. So at least one thing in the film that is executed well and done nicely, because I don't like just wholesale tearing something apart and saying it's completely valueless. So I think even bad films have value in terms of, they'll have something, they'll have a scene, they'll have maybe a line, they'll have something in there that's worth of value and worth looking at and worth praising. Just something to bring out of a bad film. I think there's always worth something worth, like a nugget of something.
I think it's very telling though
useful.
that both of us suggested the exact same thing from this film as the
well,
one.
we suggested it for slightly different reasons. So Martin, can you tell us? So the thing we settled on with our silver lining from this film is that we think the lower elements, or the place called the Haven, where Officer Holly Short and the other leprechauns, I said leprechauns then, and the other leprechauns and fairies come from, is really visually very beautiful. The CGI isn't fantastic, or it's not fantastically rendered, I think, but the actual aesthetic vision of cyberpunk fairy world would look like, I think, was actually really, really interesting. Visually, it was very appealing, very nice. It's a shame that we spend approximately 5 to 10 minutes of the film's runtime in that area. Yeah, actually, I think we spent about 15 minutes of the film's runtime in that area, and 10 of those 15 minutes are spent inside one meeting room. So they don't really utilise it at all, and it's sort of telling that such a short part, such a small part of this film's runtime is what we think is one of the best bits about the film. But Martin, you liked it for a couple of reasons, and I had a very specific reason I thought I really enjoyed it. So if you tell me your overview of why you thought it was quite interesting.
I mean, yeah, it kind of, for me, apart from anything else, smacks for a bit of wasted potential. Like, the idea of this other world that is built up to us through the introduction that we get of Colin Farrell, who plays Artemis Fowl I, teaching his son about Irish folklore and the world and the different things and agreements that they all make and the complex interaction of fairies and creatures that takes place in Irish mythology. It speaks to a great I can't think of the word. A great potential. That's the word I mean. There's a great potential there, and you're getting, for me, these like smidgens of, we had a good idea of how to put this forward as quite a unique thing, and just it's lost in the rest of the film, which is why it's a silver lining and it's a frustration for me that I think, given more time and more focus and more energy, that would have been good.
Specifically, I really loved the first shot we see of the Haven is part of Mulch's narration around it, and then we see this kind of like winged blue crystal bus arrive at one of these essentially, I guess, the Durham bus station of the Haven, and they arrive there, and Officer Holly Short gets out, and I think the shot they have of that thing descending and docking and all the creatures we see running around, I think that's really beautifully realised, and I especially loved it because I noticed something that Martin Short didn't, in that they use, for about 6 of the creatures that populate the screen skittering about, they reuse a Baby Yoda asset that Disney had available in the post-production of this film in order to populate it with more things. I think there are 5 or 6 little baby Yodas that are slightly taller but have exactly the same head shape and sort of vision, sort of move clattering around the scene, skittering around the scene in this bit where she's departing from the bus. And I pointed out to Martin, he absolutely lost his mind.
Oh, I mean, I've lost my mind because this sort of... I've lost my mind at this point just because this film has an estimated production budget of $125 million. And they're reusing their own assets from in-house production.
He said that to me, but it's the first time I've heard someone say the number out loud.
It's just upsetting. That's really a
staggering amount of money.
And I think that just, again, generalises to the other sort of misfires in the rest of the film. Just that, like, with so much potential, not that you can't produce good films on low budgets, of course you can, but that they have this much resource to work with, and this is what you're left with, is just staggering.
Well, Disney is the biggest media monopoly on the planet.
Yeah.
And this is a thing they made. We're going to move on to our general issues. So we talked about how CGI was used fairly effectively in establishing an aesthetic tone of the lower elements. However, it's a large feature of this film, and as this film's budget has proven to us, bigger isn't always better. So, what are some of the main standout issues of the CGI?
It's difficult to just talk about things like CGI, just other than just say, it was done poorly, because that doesn't feel like useful criticism. But a lot of the time, it's just very jarring. So they've constructed these very sort of abstract things. For example, these weird flying discs that can put an area of in stasis. They call it a time freeze. So the fairy force can come in and deal with something.
This is in the original book. They have the idea of the time freeze. That's how they're kept in Fowl Manor.
It makes perfect, like, in terms of the logic of the story, it's something I can fully believe. Like, that's technology that they've developed. Sure, let's go with that. But the way that it's realised is just this really over-technical and really sort of dense and weird thing. It's just an unnatural thing to look at, which is obviously it's meant to be scientific and weird device that we don't understand because it's developed by these other sort of fantastical races. But at the same time, it stands out so bizarrely against the backdrop of this very harsh, rugged Irish landscape. You can't help but look at them and just being like, that doesn't work. And
it's a shame as well, because one of the things that works in this film that we nearly talked about was how beautiful some of the landscape shots are. Martin pointed this out, and then I rebutted him by saying it's really difficult to take a bad looking video shot of the coasts of Ireland because they all look stunning.
So yeah, I was trying to posit that my favourite scene, I think, is one of the establishing shots towards the beginning of Fowl Manor as a place. And initially, you've got this like lovely, like, again, harsh, rugged. It's a sublime landscape of Ireland. The waves sort of crashing up against the rocks. It's very sort of pristine, lovely, like, establishing shot of where you're going to be, and it's a good establishing shot given you spend 95% of the movie inside 3 rooms in Fowl Manor. But your rebuttal was just, yeah, but go back and look again at what Fowl Manor looks like in arrangement with the rest of the landscape.
It looks like it's been put in post-processing, the CG, which is, I think it's a real place that they have altered with CGI.
It is a real set you can go and visit because people have broken into it already.
The ultimate Artemis Fowl crime of the century. But in general, it's not just the CG specifically, it's the visual post-processing of this film is, I think, awful. So they use, so it's not a CGI effect, but VFX they use at the very start of the film is they cut from this beautiful shot of the long shot of the Irish coastline, and they cut into the press that are mobbing Fowl Manor, watching the police arrest Mulch Diggums and sort of hounding Fowl's car as he enters back into his mansion. This, by the way, the setup for this opening scene isn't actually shown later in the film. They don't show him driving back to Fowl Manor from somewhere. He spends the entire time within the manor, so the idea of him leaving and coming back in doesn't appear again in the film, which is fun. It's great. But as they're mobbing his limousine as he goes back in towards Fowl Manor, they have what I can only describe as the equivalent to something I did in year 6 in Windows Movie Maker when creating a fake news, like a fake news broadcast sort of, ticker tape reel underneath and like, news at 7, all this kind of stuff. They have all these British reporters, for some reason exclusively speaking in British. I'm not quite sure why, like RP British. And they have all these like really fake looking newsreel things going underneath it. And I'm not sure why, with a budget of $125 million, why this, the emphasis I put on million has changed how the waveform looks on my thing, which I think is quite funny. With $125 million, why they've used an effect that looks so amateurish, and it's startling because in the Marvel films they do this very effectively. In other Disney properties they do this very effectively by having fake newscasts and stuff, building like a sort of an established verisimilitude to the actual world itself, and it looks so ugly and fake, and it's like it's literally like they spent half an afternoon doing it and then gone, yeah, I'll do, chuck it in. Which it seems to be an attitude for a lot of the shots that are used within this film. And that, in particular, that's one of my most egregious uses of visual effects, is not just how the CGI isn't properly rendered, so a lot of it looks rubbery and really fake, and it just looks like it's part of some 3D animation that's really fit with the rest of the... It's almost like like a 3D Space Jam's happening on top of like a live-action Artemis Fowl film. It's bizarre, but... This I think is one of the typifications of the poor and just shoddy and cheap and amateur looking effects they use. It are these horrible, like, mocked up newsreel things. They really, it looks really amateur and sluggish, and then they cut to this edgy black and white shot of Mulch Diggums in some unspecified MI6 torture chamber underneath in the middle of the Thames. And it's all shot in black and white, and it's very gritty and it's very in focus.
The sort of literal artificial nature of the CGI and the confused change between black and white monochrome shots for literally just for edge just speaks to the general problem I have with the editing of the film en masse. It's just so the general editing itself, go ahead. It's not just a case of
go off, King.
It's not just a case of things looking artificial or out of place or just wrong in some cases. I'm looking at you, Mulch Diggums, when you pull open your own mouth and start chomping your way through dirt and spitting out of your arse. They've gone for this really bizarre mood that just isn't the same as the books, that even with my sort of limited knowledge of the book series as a whole, the mood that they've gone for is not the same as kind of like fairly light-hearted, but otherwise some jeopardy, like sci-fi fantasy stories. It's almost like they've gone for the borderline between hard sci-fi and sci-fi light.
Well, so what this kind of it bleeds into the adaptation part again, but I'm happy talking about that now, because the way they've edited this film, and it speaks to a larger problem with action films in general, is they've edited this film to the archetype of the superhero movie. So they've edited this film to try and fit in with the sort of Disney MCU structure and tone, and to an extent, not necessarily the theme, but the structure, the tone, and the aesthetics of a big budget Avengers style team up film. So they have they quite early on establish they bring in Dom's niece for some reason into the film, and it's almost like a getting the team together sort of montage with that, when they haven't done anything to establish done any necessary character work to establish that as an impactful moment. They do the same when Holly Short is brung onto the team, and it's framed as this kind of Avengers getting the team together sort of thing for this final showdown, and it functionally does not work.
No.
Because this, the source material they're adapting, yes, you can adapt source material interestingly and do different things with it. I mean, the Marvel films are wholly different beasts to the comics they are adapted from. But for reference, the Artemis Fowl series has always been kind of a slower, considered pace. It takes its time establishing mood and mise en scène and what things are happening in the scene, how environments reflect on the really pale pallor of Artemis Fowl, and like how that kind of sets the tone for how out of place he is in a scene. This is really considered approach to how the characters develop and how they interact with each other. So, for example, the opening to Chapter 1, Ho Chi Minh City in the summer, sweltering by anyone's standards. Needless to say, Artemis Fowl would not have been willing to put up with such discomfort if something extremely important had not been at stake. Important to the plan. Sun did not suit Artemis. He did not look well in it. Long hours indoors in front of a computer screen had bleached the glow from his skin. He was white as a vampire, and almost as testy in the light of day. Like, these are the prose is very considered about how the aesthetics of a character impact your perception of them, and sort of these kind of wittier sides to what these are like. And it's they're marketed for ages 8 and up for reading ability, but they can skew a bit higher, I think, sometimes. And it's very considered. It's not this very high, not high octane, but like high paced action CGI fest that this film skews for in its edit.
What you've said about that passage from the beginning makes it even more clear just why this film is so different. That is literally an antithesis of what we get in this moment. I refuse to call it a scene because I and many other people who've reviewed this film would stand by that. This is a film in which a sequence of things just sort of happens without any real structure. But this particular sequence is a montage which is meant to be like his sort of first discovery and first toe in the pool of like, oh god, all of this stuff that my dad taught me is actually real, and I'm discovering what he actually was doing, which wasn't just international art dealer or whatever. He's actually underground sort of criminal genius dealing in all sorts of weird mystical artifacts. But we don't see any of that really established. What we get is effectively in a brief frame narration what we get from Mulch Dickens, who literally in sort of 2 or 3 lines says his dad, played by Colin Farrell, taught him all this stuff about Irish folklore. And then the discovery of this one room where he keeps some stuff and just very conveniently comes across this one text that's actually his father's journal. It's like in literally 2 minutes of film, say, we're just supposed to believe now that Artemis Fowl is suddenly just completely clued into the world of fairies because we're told he's gifted at school and reads above his age and stuff.
And so this is again one of the problems in terms of the structural and moment-to-moment editing is that it's after the fact of this brilliant heist that Artemis Fowl has done. And they talk about Mulch Dickens frames it as he was never an ordinary boy at school. So they start with him at school being reviewed by this head teacher / psychiatrist that he's talking to.
And you know, when you're that unusual, you're gonna stick out.
Now, Artemis, let's talk, shall we?
Certainly, sir.
Ah, I can see you're admiring my chair. It's a family heirloom. Grandfather acquired it from Sotheby's. William and Mary period. 1689 to 1702, as I'm sure you know. But who sadly had absolutely no control over your behavior. Then, of course, there's your father and his mysterious absences from home.
This is a sensitive area, Doctor.
But do you think that's why you are as you are?
No. And by the way, I didn't know they allowed fakes at the palace.
Fake?
It's clever, I'll give you that. But look at these furniture tacks. Criss-cross pattern on the head. Machine tooled. Makes it 1890s at the earliest. Your grandfather was duped.
Artemis, you're lashing out at me, but I think I know what this is really about. Is it because of the burden of your father's name?
It's a scene with very little momentum.
No.
And in terms of its narration and its dialogue, it doesn't have a particular direction to it. It's meant to establish, he's an arsehole kid who then, and then it's in the first probably under half an hour of the film, it's edited to him becoming a super knowledgeable person about the world of fairies and able to enact these brilliant plans about it. The books join us at a point where we don't have to explain why he's genius. There's the fantasy of this super genius kid, that already exists. You join at that point. And then what's interesting is, as he's forced to encounter an other that isn't subservient to him and that isn't dominated by his extreme wealth, and someone that he's forced to confront the morality of how he deals with other people, we watch how that changes him for the better. And that's not the story this film is interested in telling. This film is interested in telling a story about bright lights that appear on screen, bit of shooting lasers, and a kid who does traps with magic things that aren't set up at all.
Leads into performances, which is something I want to highlight.
Let's move on to some of the bad casting decisions in this. Well, not to say the bad. I would say it's not bad casting, because the actors they've chosen to do these things are good, but the direction, the script they have to work with is a difficult task, shall we say.
The transformation of Artemis Fowl and repositioning of him not as the sort of anti-villain protagonist, but just as this like arsehole kid who's just really snarky and is just so unsatisfying, but also it's mainly unsatisfying because, and I feel so bad for Ferdia Shaw, who plays young Artemis Fowl in the film, to have this as your like direct cinematic debut, because this is going to stand on such a black mark that I would honestly be surprised if we do see him working in any sort of major role at any point in the near future, because he's given, it's not his fault. I think he could have done a lot better if he'd been given more work, but most of the scenes read almost like he's engaged, delivered the lines, and is then standing there waiting for some direction or some thought or literally any sort of emotional expression. He's just devoid of response most of the time.
For me, I feel really bad for Ferdia Shaw, because I don't think he's a bad child actor necessarily. I don't think he's talentless. He delivers lines with good enunciation, with good emotionality at various points, but it doesn't work because you can quite clearly tell. So when I think child actors are quite useful in bad films, because they serve to highlight when it's a child actor performing badly because they don't have the faculties to perform well as an actor. They haven't developed those faculties yet. Or when a film's poorly directed. So when actors are, when not just the film's intentionality is poorly directed, or the film's mise-en-scène is poorly directed, when the actual performances themselves are poorly directed. I think a child actor helps to actually highlight that. So it's hard to tell, for example, when Judi Dench is putting in a bad performance. Like, why Judi Dench is putting in a bad performance. She's bad in this film. She's bad in Cats. But it's often hard to tell when these prestige actors put in a bad performance, why exactly, what's gone wrong, when they couldn't be asked. But the presence of Ferdia Shaw and how he walks around like a listless boat on stage, he doesn't know, on the set, he doesn't know exactly where he's meant to go. Yeah. His lines feel unfocused and undirected because he hasn't been told what to do. And when Judi Dench can, even if she's bad in it, like in this film, she is an experienced actor where she knows what her character is doing. She knows the basic through line, even if it doesn't logically make sense, nothing in this film does. She knows the emotional through line of a character, because she's been acting for years and years and years, so she can instinctively tell these sorts of things. So her performance will have a kind of momentum to it. Artemis Fowl's performance in this film does not, because a child at that age does not know, cannot do the mental gymnastics to unpack the emotionality of a character without being helped through it by a director.
Likewise, you've got the scene, I mean, we've already put spoiler warnings in way before this, when the brief moment where Dom is suggested that he's been killed in the fight with the troll that's let into the manor, there's some genuine emotion comes out there, and that's clearly a scene which had some time spent on it. Like, you do feel quite bad for him in that he's lost not only his actual father, but now it feels like his surrogate father figure.
But also, I would argue that until he tells you, these are my last words, which are a line that Dom says, you don't actually know, you can't tell that he's in mortal danger because he sat upright. The previous scene ended with, we killed the trolls, or funny joking things, the things, and then it cuts to Dom sat upright, and you're like...
There's clearly, at the very core of this, there must have been at one point something good to do, but it's so confused and so overdeveloped in the sense that it's been worked on for so long that just whatever impulse that was there has been lost or not communicated or whatever it may be. It's what's been produced is now bad.
Let's talk about Judi Dench a bit, shall we?
Oh, do we have
to? Because nobody expected that the House of Mouse would produce, in the year of our Lord, the year of our good Christian God in 2020, that Judi Dench would be putting in a worse performance than her time in Cats. She is in Cats, compared to this, she is resplendent on screen in Cats compared to the barked orders and the fact she's not looking any, like she never looks in the direction that she's moving towards, or like she doesn't direct speech to people. She just sort of, it's a shot of her looking slightly right of camera and she says a line in response to another thing. And yeah,
I don't know whether it's Judi Dench's. Well, I was going to say, I don't know if it's because she's not used to working in CG, but she was also in Cats, so she is. Which is...
So what's your question about? What is it? Why the performance doesn't work?
As in, why is Judi... Because Judi Dench has been in so much stuff that she must be able to act.
Do you want to hear my grand unifying theory as to why this film is shit that involves Judi Dench?
Oh, you promised me this, and you wouldn't tell me what it is, so I do.
I promise you this. If you rewatch the film, I've watched bits of it again, and you colour your watch with the thought in your head that Judi Dench only made herself available for one single day for this entire film, and they've had to recut the entire film around her only being available for one day for ADR, for on-set stuff, for being CG'd into stuff. I reckon she was only available for at most 1 or 2 days, and they had to restructure the entire, because she plays an antagonistic role as the head of the leprechaun unit, and so much of the film, when you look at it, like the reason her voiceover ADR'd in weirdly cuts over other lines, like Holly Short will be saying a phrase, and it'll cut over like "remember to get back" when she hasn't said she won't get back, and why her line's confusingly placed, why she doesn't respond in a measured time to Foley, which is the centre or the head of the tech at the Leprechaun Centre. None of that seems to work, and why she's so weird in her conversation with Ferdia Shaw as Artemis Fowl is, I think, all of her lines, she never interacted with another human being on that set. All of her lines were ADR'd in afterwards, and she might have even been superimposed into some of the scenes she was in. I genuinely don't think she was there for more than a day of that film.
You know what?
Grand unifying theory.
As I was listening to it, I'm like, this seems so outlandish, but also allegedly...
It makes perfect sense, right?
It makes sense, one, in the context of the film, also some outside evidence, if you like.
Tell me more.
Allegedly, Colin Farrell shot all of his scenes for this film in about 3 days. So actually, I couldn't believe that's what happened.
Well, so my thought is, when you watch this film and you watch the esteemed star of stage and screen, Judi Dench, Dame Judi Dench, on screen, and you look at why is that the line read they went for? Why did they not? Where's the second take of this? Why is that not put in here?
So many of her scenes she's shot on her own, centrally, like it's in a cockpit of there with flying machines, or she's in the control room herself.
Or whatever, and even if she's in a control room with someone, there's never a close-up of her face next to someone else, and the only close-up of the face are her leaving rooms as she's saying, They kind of tease her dropping an F-bomb at one point. What in the four-leaf clover, I think it was.
Even the interrogation scene at the table is shot for shot, backwards and forwards between the two of them.
Exactly. I knew you'd react like this. So at first you're like, this is like a funny joke he's done. I genuinely believe they had Judi Dench for one day, and that's all. Because you look at, this is a brilliant, fantastic actress who's put in some of the best performances that have been on screen and on stage
ever
of all time,
ever.
And also the role she's playing is essentially a replication of her role as M, which is in terms of the British cultural and I'd say the global cultural consciousness, that's her most esteemed and most seen role, and she does it pitch perfectly. And you look at this, why couldn't they get another line read? Why is this line so awkward? Why is she gruffly shouting at this scene? Why is she never looking towards anyone she's talking to, but slightly right off camera? It's because she only did these scenes once. They only had her for one day. And when at the minute Kenneth Branagh was like, we really need to get her in to do another line of this. Like, no, she can't. She's ADRing her voiceover for this scene. Oh no, she can't. She's currently pacing around the control room. She's pacing around in front of the green screen. Oh no, she can't. Sorry, she's her face is being digitally masked, so we can chuck it in places if we need to.
Oh, I'm so upset.
It's true. I genuinely think it's true.
The thing is, I'm upset because I can also see that happening, and the worst part is that would make a lot of sense.
That was my big thing of this film, was how I hated the action because of how much I love the books, and also the grand unifying theory of Judi Dench. Every time we've talked to Martin about this film, he has the most virulent hatred I've seen a reviewer have for an actor. With regards to Josh Gadd in this film, and Josh Gadd's role as Mulch Dickens as the narrator of this film. So Martin Shaw, please take it away.
I'll preface this section with, I don't have anything against Josh Gadd.
He definitely does. I'll preface it with, Martin Shaw has nothing against Josh Gadd. I'm going to preface it with, if Josh Gadd right now asked Martin to fight him in an octagon with knives, Martin Shaw would take it up and he would kill him. That's what I'm going to preface this with, because you were so incensed. That was, for legal reasons, that was a joke.
Yeah, it would only get to that point if he was constantly quoting his lines from Artemis Fowl at me. Then things might get a bit shaky. But yeah, I think he's a very competent actor elsewhere. But in this, his role in this film is as this frame narrator character. So he's the one telling us the story of this film regularly. It's not like an introduction and a conclusion sort of frame. It's a constant, rigid, it was a scene transition, so I'm gonna tell you what's happening in the next scene.
We want to know everything about the man you work for. The man? Oh no. This isn't about the father. This is about the son, Artemis Fowl.
God, it's just exhausting because it again.
Here's the bit where I remind you the running joke is that I'm a dwarf with gigantism.
Every as much as you're taking the piss, like every point he interrupts, just breaks any sense of cohesion and pacing that this film tries to savour with its mismatched edit, which can only be assumed as how they've managed to put something together. It's just, I think this frame narration exists to try and stitch what they had left of this film, just as they were about to release it, to just kind of effectively paper over the cracks between the discordant, disjointed bits that they filmed.
I agree with you. I think this was all done afterwards, which would make sense why the bit of him being captured at the start and then put in the interrogation room, why there's actually... He gets taken out of he gets put into a police car from a limousine, and it's implied to be the Fowl limousine returning back to Fowl Manor, but we don't actually see, there's no scene that starts this car journey.
There's no establishing of that, because I think this was put in afterwards. Yeah.
Which would explain why the VFX on the news media was so terrible.
Bad. Probably quite rushed. I think it's emblematic of what must have been a very good save for Disney as a production house in terms of releasing this film on Disney Plus, as opposed to giving it the theatrical release that it was actually promised, which was cancelled in response to the coronavirus panic. I think it's a very good cover for them, because ultimately they will have saved a lot more money dumping it on Disney Plus and being like, look, you've got something new to watch, but also please go and watch everything else that's on Disney Plus.
Well, I think it'd be interesting as well, because it's... Because essentially, the way they've marketed it is, as far as I can see, is to get really young kids and also fans of the Artemis Fowl books to get a Disney Plus subscription to watch it. Mm-hmm. And I guess they must be making enough of a profit, or must be making enough of not a loss on Disney Plus, where $125 million doesn't look like too much in regard if you dump it on your streaming platform.
Yeah, because I mean, to like top Disney execs, $125 billion, I imagine is like it's not an insignificant amount of money by any stretch, but to top Disney execs, it's probably still like, it's fine, we'll just release another Marvel film. It'll make billions. Like, it's fine.
It'll make that much money on like novelty cups.
Yeah, it'll make that much money back in spades, and they can forget Artemis Fowl ever happened. Probably. I really hope that they do, and not do the thing which the most egregious crime that this film does in this frame narration at the end, where they suddenly rescue Mulch Diggums. It turns out that the frame narration is actually in the present, and the film you've been watching is in the past. All of a sudden, they rescue him from the underground bunker that they have him in, and then at the end of the film, you literally get the line, "It's time to finish what we started," just before it cuts. I might be repositioning it in the film, but it does happen because I remember being so incensed that I wrote it down.
Yeah, I think it might be like, I think
it's just after he gets his dad back, and they're starting to set off in the helicopter, being like, it's time to finish what we started, because they worked so poorly to try and establish a villain that I didn't even catch the name of the first time I watched it.
The only reason I know the name of this villain is because I read the books, and the third book in the series is named after her. This discussion of antagonists leads really nicely into the discussion of adaptation. So, one of the reasons I'm sad about how the plot of this film plays out is because I think the plot that underlies the first Artemis Fowl book is actually quite touching. Artemis Fowl II, he has dedicated his entire life previous to that to criminal activities. He has the only father figure he has is Butler, his butler Dom, and it starts with him and his butler in Ho Chi Minh City. He finds an alcoholic sprite posing as a healer, and travels there to obtain the Book of the People, which is a fairy holy book written in Gnomish, which is how you can access fairy secrets. And so his whole plan is the entire thing in this film is he kidnaps Holly Short, similar to how in the film, but he does it in the book in order to ransom her back to the haven, the lower elements, in order to get a huge amount of gold, which is like their fairies are worth a certain amount of gold. They have a certain amount of gold for ransoms, or whatever it is, and so he gets the Book of the People in order to observe a fairy doing a ritual, sees her there, tranquilizes her, takes her back, and the entire film is the entire book is a dialogue between the two of them, whilst the fairies have put a time stop around Fowl Manor before they plan their incursion. His plan about it is because it affects all awake creatures, so he and everyone take sleeping pills and they slip out from underneath it. It's like a cool. He invents his time. It's not like super clever. Like, it's a fun little trick that works well in a children's book. He gives her something that robs her of Holly of her magic, and then there's a conversation with the two of them the whole time, and it's revealed that under the commander of Briar Cudgeon, who takes over from the character of Julius Root, they're going to basically essentially nuke inside the time stop and kill all life. They've got a thing called a biobomb that kills all living organic matter. And so eventually he slips from the time stop, so this thing will have no effect. The LEP, because he survives the time stop, the LEP they have to give him the remaining gold. And basically what happens is Artemis Fowl promises Holly Short, says he'll release her, and so he says, I'll give you at least half of this gold back if you use your magic to cure my mum. With one of the underlying themes of the book, which is his mother who's been driven to insanity by the loss of his father. And so she uses her magic, and so he lets her go. it's a story about a boy who's sort of dislocated from the world so much he's constructed this artifice of the villainous mastermind, and then at the end of it he's a scared 12-year-old boy whose mum isn't well and he doesn't know where his dad is, and so then he asks someone to help him, and that's the arc that the book has, and it's beautiful. And
I was going to say, listening to you describe that was far more satisfying than watching this film.
So in the second book, it's revealed that Artemis' dad is alive, and he's been kidnapped by Opal Cowboy, who has taken him to the Arctic. And there's a story about, and it's called Artemis and the Arctic Circle, and it's about Artemis trying to infiltrate in to retrieve his dad with all the new knowledge he's gathered, and with the help of Holly Short and Mulch Diggins, the returning cast of characters. In this film, what happens is they borrow that plotline of the dad being kidnapped. They have the dad at the start of the film, no mum. The push of the film is Artemis wants his dad back, and his dad's been kidnapped, and they're saying he's done crimes, but he hasn't really done crimes, so I'm going to become a criminal in order to prove it. I'm going to kidnap an actual human being to prove it as a child, which is like a character that makes sense for the character in the book, but not in this film, who's normal. He's just a bit of an arsehole schoolboy suddenly turned into this master criminal human trafficker. And so they, and it's real that Opal Cowboy has stolen his dad to get her hands on the Aculos, because she thinks he has it. Then at the end, they find the MacGuffin, which is the Aculos, which isn't in this film, in the book. I keep saying the film or the book. The MacGuffin of the Aculos, which is not in the book, this magical MacGuffin, and Holly can just use the magic to teleport the dad back. They don't go to the Arctic at all. So when people say it's a merging of the first two books, what they mean is it's the first book made worse by the exclusion of the mother, and the dad is just in the Arctic for the whole film until the end when he's magically teleported back. And what the thing with the mother at the end isn't like a Deus Ex Machina thing, because Artemis has been sort of at peace with his mother being this way throughout the whole book until he realises there's a fairy with magic to heal can help his mum. And so, because at the minute his dad's gone missing, that kind of stuff, and so he's trying to get money in order to build back the fate.
Yeah. It's a satisfying.
Yeah, and then we get he wins, so that initial character motivation is fulfilled. But then there's a change of it, right? That I don't want to win as much as I could do because I want my mum back, please. And then it's a turn, it's an arc. In this film, it's just he wants to find a MacGuffin to prove his dad's innocent. He finds a MacGuffin. The MacGuffin brings his dad back.
He finds it on the premises of his own house as well, which is just...
Also, yeah, and also it's just been in the house the whole time, which is just because they didn't have the time, presumably, to shoot anywhere apart from within the set of the Fowl Manor.
It's just... Yeah, I mean, it's a bad adaptation from the sounds of it. And I think there is evidence that they were potentially using more of the plot of the first film, because if you go back and watch the trailer they released in 2018, there are some shots which I've seen... Oh, I don't know, because I can't remember the plot of them. There's scenes which suggest the mother subplot was in there when they released that trailer, which is cut material that's not present in the film as it stands now. No.
It makes sense in terms of, like, there was actually a better adaptation of the novel that existed, but due to the development hell it's been through, the change from the trailers, they've obviously brought in Colin Farrell at quite a high cost.
Yeah.
And then reframe the entire film around that. Which is not to say that the film as it looked in 2018 was necessarily a good film, but it was certainly different, and the implied amount of difference we see might give us a clue as to why this film might be bad.
I think that's a good summary of just a lot of the problems that... They're problems that you can easily pick up on in your own right, but they're all problems that speak to a larger, like, central issue, which is just being in development for so long and under so many people. I think at one point it was written by as many as 4 people, which is never a good sign for a screenplay. It is just confused more than anything else, I think, is the best way to describe it. And
this is what we said at the start. We have spent some of this time dunking on the film, sure. It's a bit cathartic when a film like this comes out and it kind of scuppers a chance for you to see a book that meant a lot to you when you were a kid translated onto screen, and it kind of sucks when this is what comes out of it.
Because for readers of the books as children, this is like premium time for it to be released, because they'll all be sort of mid to late 20s, early 30s perhaps, with sort of the largest, as far as consumers, the largest percentage of disposable income to go and watch films and spend money on stuff like this. It also could have been a great opportunity to reintroduce the books to a new audience that wouldn't grow up with.
That is what I will say is the one thing I like. Actually, this is maybe my post hoc silver lining of this is that the release of the film catapulted Artemis Fowl back to number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list when it was released, which I, purely in terms of an economic thing of this book being read more, I'm happy with that. Because this film ultimately wasn't released in cinemas. The only people who will see it are people who already have Disney Plus subscriptions. It's not going out of its way to hurt people. It sucks that a book series I like has been stripped thematically bare into something barren and really cynical.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, the source material has been read a lot more than it has been in recent years because of the film, so that is a positive. And Owen Colfer in general, brilliant chap, really good writer, has some brilliant books that I'd recommend checking out highly. If you are listening to the thing about watching the film to get your kids into the books, just read the books to them. Just don't watch the film. You don't have to. It's cynical. It's not good for their brains. Judi Dench. It's worse than the time Judi Dench spreads her legs for the audience's pleasure in Cats, which is the fact that within a year she's managed to make a worse film than that makes me worried she's started a trajectory of just being an absolute dreck that's going to continue for a while, which I'm not a fan of as an idea.
I don't want Judi Dench to have a Nicolas Cage period in her career.
Sorry, hang on. I thought you were about to just end it at, I don't want Judi Dench to be Nicholas. As in with Sans Nicholas. Which I also don't want to be.
I mean, I feel like I already kind of saw that in Cats and I didn't enjoy it then. But yeah, I that's the ending thought, is neither of us want Judi Dench to become Nicolas Cage.
I think that'll do it for us. So thank you very much for joining us dissecting this Disasterpiece. I've been Martin.
I've also been Martin.
Where can we find you on the internet, Mr. Martin?
You can find me at cinematography.wordpress.com, where you can find the article that this review, Disasterpiece review, was based on. You can also find me on whatculture.com, writing primarily for the film, TV, and game sections.
If you want to find me online, you can check out The Haven, which is an actual play D&D 5th edition podcast focusing on collaborative storytelling. Episode 8 of that should be up by the time this episode comes out, which is a really big task I've just set myself because I edit both this and that show. So if it's not, you'll realise I've made a mistake. Please leave us an iTunes review or a Spotify review wherever you are listening to this. If it's on a podcast platform, please pop us a review, a rating, and especially a comment about if you like the show, why you'd recommend it. Maybe talk about something we've talked about in today's episode or any other episode we've done, just because that really helps boosting us on discoverability. If you're watching us on YouTube, please press subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment telling us, have you ever listened to Artemis Fowl? What's the worst adaptation of a children's property you really enjoyed when you were younger? Something like that in the comments below, and we can have a little chat about it. All these things really help towards the discoverability and also lets us interact with you, the viewer. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on WordPress. I've made that promise in every single episode, and the WordPress is still not up. So this is a challenge to me.
But it will be.
Challenge to future Martin, put up the bloody WordPress. And you can find us on all good podcast platforms. Just search Movies and Martins. And I really hope you enjoyed today's show. Please do get in touch if you want to have a chat about that. And we post a lot of stuff on our social feeds about things we're working on, fun reviews, all that kind of stuff. And so just follow the podcast. Thank you very much for joining me. He has been Martin.
He's also been Martin.
And that's the end of the episode.
Oh, that's the longest one we've recorded. written a really good menu. Oh, Jesus. Here's my podcast menu.
Looks like meat's back on the podcast menu, boys.
Oh, it's not a good day for movies and Martins.
That could be our slogan.
It's never a good day for movies and Martins. Should we start again?
I'm sort of wondering that, yeah.
Oh, I'll get my adjectives back up.
Get me adjectives back up. Is that? I think Pfizer manufacture a pill for that, mate.
That